All right, so as people start filing in, I'll just introduce myself. So my name is Becca, and I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books, although I'm currently in Saratoga Springs, New York, studying at Skidmore College right now.
Cool.
But Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. So you can pretty much find us right outside of Cambridge, Mass. And then before we begin, I'd just like to let everybody know of a number of other virtual events that are coming up in October. So the first being Brad Kessler, who's the author of North, and he'll be in conversation with Catherine Bush on October 7th. And then the second is Ed Fuller and Gary Grossman, who are the authors of Red Deception, and they'll be in conversation with Stan Deutsch on October 12th. So you can register for these events as well as other events happening later in the month on our website, which is belmontbooks.com. That's also where you can purchase tonight's book, I Am Not Who You Think I Am, and I'll be sending out a link to that shortly. And then if you have any concerns during the event, please feel free to message me in the chat. But we do ask that if you have any questions for the authors that you put them in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. And we'll hope to get to as many of your questions as we can. So we're really excited to welcome Eric Rickstad and Richard Chizmar. I want to tell you just a little bit about them, and then I'll turn the event over to them. So first we have Eric Rickstad, who's the author of the new novel, I'm Not Who You Think I Am. He's also the New York Times, USA Today, and international bestselling author of books The Silent Girls, Lie in Wait, Names of Dead Girls, and Reap. These novels are heralded as intelligent, profound, dark, disturbing, and heartbreaking. And Eric currently lives in his home state of Vermont with his wife, son, and daughter. And then we have Richard Chizmar, who is also a New York Times bestselling author. He is the co-author with Stephen King of the best-selling novella Wendy's Button Box, and the author of the book Chasing the Boogeyman, which is featured in today's event. And Richard currently lives in Maryland with his wife and sons. So we're so excited to have you both here with us this evening. And without further ado, I'll turn the event over to you guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Eric, you wanna lead off by reading for a bit, or should we at least tell them a little bit about the book that you had released today?
Yeah, we could tell them a little bit about the book if you want to. Do you want me to do that, or should I?
I think you can. I want to say before we get started, it gets my vote for best cover of the year. This thing is amazing. And this is the ARC. This is not the actual hardcover, but it's the same cover. And I've stared at this thing 20 times at least. And it's a beautiful cover, and it's absolutely also gets my vote for one of my favorite reads of the year. So yeah, you can give maybe a little background on the plot, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, yeah. So this is it's a more gothic book than previous ones. I've always had a tinge of that, and it's really about this young boy who walks in, comes home early from school, and he's in third grade, about 8 years old, and witnesses what he thinks is his father killing himself. And he finds a note at the feet of his father, I am not who you think I am. And he's traumatized, and he's grief-stricken, and he's confused, and he hides the note. When his mom comes in, the father's taken away in a silent ambulance, and his mother asks, was there a note? Was there a note? And for some reason he says, no, there wasn't, because there's something about it that makes him say no. And then a few years later, about 8 years later, when he's in high school, his mother had never gotten him any help. And then she also rid the house within days of every trace of his father that he ever even existed, every single thing. And the only thing that's left are the books that his father cherished, that this young boy, Waylon, kept and secreted and hid in his bedroom, a .22 revolver, very good for dramatic purposes, and the note. And when he's in high school, 16 years old, something happens that jars him, and he thinks, this is physical evidence that I don't even think that was my father in the room that day. His back was to me. There was a shotgun involved, so it was not a very clean suicide. And there's the note, and he begins to wonder, was that my father? If it wasn't, who was it? And if it wasn't, where is he? Where is my father? And what was this man doing on the edge of my parents' bed? And who wrote the note? Because he always assumed his father did. And he follows this, he starts investigating and really wanting to find out. And to me, the core of it is really about a boy that doesn't want his father to be dead, doesn't want this to have happened, and wants to do anything he can to undo this and to get his father back, or to find out at least what happened. And the further along he goes, the more it leads to confusion and violence and distrust of his mother, and leads to sort of this dark Gothic mystery novel.
Yeah, no, that's a great description. And what I was going to say is the main character's name, the boy, his name's Waylon. And when you were talking about how the mother kind of rid the house of all the father's belongings so quickly, it just felt like, I know from a reading standpoint, it felt like this emotional vacancy that made me, angry as the reader. And I realized I was walking in Waylon's footsteps by then. And as I read more and more, I became more confused because of the mysteries that were happening, but also more angry in a way, because, the guy was dealt a pretty rough hand, and he was doing his best to be a good person and to find these answers, and so he could live. And, his mom was providing no help. And I just thought it was an interesting kind of dynamic that I was immediately thrust into his brain and his footsteps, and I felt those emotions. And so you did good. And then as the mystery deepens, you had me in your grip, which sounds like a cliche, but in this case it wasn't, because I found myself wrestling against it. I'm like, no more. But yeah, you kept piling on. So nice job. And I know my blurb for the book, I referenced this when we were speaking before. I wanted to be careful how I worded it, because it is an entertaining book. You can pick this book up and you can read it for pure entertainment value and escapism. But at the same time, it's one of those books that touches your soul and works you a little bit that way. So I just didn't want to scare anyone away. So
yeah, it can be somewhat devastating at points and surprising. And the ending, I won't give anything away, but it's, it goes deeper and deeper into the mystery, and there's, a lot of revelations at the end that are sort of shocking. And it deals a little bit with a wealthy family up on this estate, and, I'm not giving anything away when I say a mansion burns and people, there's sort of this night of madness and murder in this mansion at the end. But I really try to write where, you're invested. So I'm glad you were, where you are with the character and sort of in their skin. So you're in some ways as confused or angry as they might be. So I'm glad it worked for you, because you've read a lot of books, and it's not easy to keep authors engaged, particularly too, in certain ways.
What's interesting is, I think because of what you said, because I do read a lot of books and a lot of manuscripts, I can usually almost feel it happening. I can usually feel the process unfolding, and now I'm invested in the story, that kind of thing. In this case, it was such an emotional response that it kind of blindsided me. And that's when I knew, I'm like, okay, this is a really good story, because, I kind of got slapped out of nowhere, and now I'm pissed off, and now I got to keep flipping the pages, and I'm on this guy's side, and they better stop messing with him. And, and instead, it kept spiraling. And like I said, very impressive. And I appreciate it. I know I emailed right away after I read it. And, or actually, I think I posted online first, because my reaction was so visceral.
Yeah. And, I felt, the same with reading, Chasing the Boogeyman, your latest, and it's funny because we're both about the same age, and both of these books your book is set in the 80s as well as this book. And it's the first
small towns.
Yeah, both in small towns and dealing with a mystery. And I gotta say, people should definitely check out Chasing the Boogeyman too. That people that are here tonight probably are, deeply into mysteries and dark novels and suspense, and it had me. And I won't give too much away in the same regard, but the way you handled what you were doing, because you're the main character in this novel.
I don't know how that happened.
And it was great the way you spun it, and the way you wrote it as involved in this, a serial killer in your own small town. I won't get into how it resolves itself, but
well, thank you.
I was fully invested. And you had such great details. I remember I would be DMing you. You're probably like, you can just, contact me when you're done reading the book, Eric. It's okay. But about like small things that like my sisters would appreciate growing up on our street, the tar bubbles, just small things like that on the hot pavement that I don't think they use the same tar anymore. And they would make these bubbles and you'd
Right.
just pop them. They make this really snappy. It's like the original bubble wrap on.
Yeah, it would squirt. It would squirt the hot, fluid out.
Yeah. So my sisters would appreciate that too. So, but it is a great book, and people should definitely give it a read.
Well, thank you. I was going to say, speaking of both books being in the 80s, I mean, is that something that you had in mind right from the very beginning with yours, or?
Yeah, I think I knew. Yeah, I wanted it to be written because the framework is that you're actually reading a manuscript that was written by a narrator, a man who's about our age, in present day, reflecting back on that time. So the first thing you read is a letter from the police from this small town addressing the town, saying, we received this manuscript, we had to vet it, make sure that this person was actually telling the truth, or as close as we could tell. But he's claiming that he was this young boy that died the night of this fire in this mansion, and this night of madness and murder. And he's here to sort of set the record straight. I know what happened that night because I was involved. And so I knew I didn't want to write about it as the young kid, now. I wanted to write about it as someone 30 years removed reflecting on it. So I had to go back that far anyway. And I always wanted to write a novel sort of set back then. And, those 80s, late 70s and early 80s were a great time to be a kid. Not that they aren't, but it was a different time,
Right.
I got to roam the town again, like I did my own town as a kid. I got to walk the railroad tracks like Waylon walks, and I got to go onto this estate, and I got to, I got to, be able to write about those things that I did and loved.
It was such a freer time, and both in positive and negative ways. And I mean, my son and I were talking about the other day, and he's like, "Dad, you guys were like," he's like, and I know. I know my grandparents were great parents to you. He's like, but you were like a step away from street urchins, weren't you? You and your friends. And I'm like, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, came in, filthy, and as long as you were home in time for dinner, and it was just a different time. So I loved how you opened with the letter. I always look at that as kind of like the message in a bottle type stories. And and then as a reader, it's your job to be convinced or not of the authenticity of the story. And obviously with your book, I had no problem with that pretty much right away. But I love those stories. As a reader, you can kind of picture me just kind of wringing my hands when I see that kind of an opening. So I think people are going to love that.
Yeah, I hope so. Do you want me to read a little bit and then we can get back into it?
Yeah, I would read for a bit and then we can come back and talk a little. I'd love to know, your inspiration for the novel. And I like to talk about the three main characters a little bit because.
Okay. I'll read for like maybe 5-6 minutes.
Sure.
Which is 2 chapters. I write very short chapters.
Yeah.
So
good to hear.
Let me put on my apparatus here. This one is first chapter is called First Things First. And it's 1976. What I need you to understand first is that my father was a good man. He was not that father conjured up in mass market paperbacks, that mad, cruel, belittling, wife-beating drunkard dredged up from the basement of Fiction 101 to explain away the wounded protagonist's maligned and fateful existence. No, my father was a gentle, prim, fastidious man. Emotionally reserved at times, perhaps, though no more so than other men of his stripe who came of age after World War II. He was a barber who operated his business out of a single chair shop. He wore his hair shorn close as suede nap, his side part as sharp as the edge of his gleaming straight razor. He smelled of hair tonic and talcum powder, and his hands were pale and soft and warm. He rose every Monday through Saturday to eat a breakfast of 2 eggs, sunny side up, 2 slices of toasted Wonder Bread, and 3 strips of bacon, crisp, washed back with a piping hot cup of Folgers and a tumbler of cold OJ from concentrate. Finished, he'd dab the corners of his mouth with a paper napkin and give a clear-eyed "Thank you, dear" to my mother as he pushed back his chair and set to buffing his Tom McCanns until their faux black leather shone like a shellacked beetle shell. He'd grab his steel lunchbox, packed with his 2 deviled ham sandwiches and 2 dill pickles, venture out to his GMC sidestep and drive to work. He'd appear again at 6 p.m. when my mother had some casserole or loaf waiting. This was his routine, his life, Monday through Saturday. He never missed a day. He never once raised his voice or his hand to me or to my sister, and never ever to my mother. Not that I remember anyway. What I do remember of my parents from that time is their affection for each other. It was a genuine, gentle, pure, and at times, for a young boy, embarrassing. Often in the evenings after supper, my mother would curl up in my father's lap as he relaxed in his easy chair before he settled in to read. She'd rest her head on his shoulder, touch his brow with her fingertips. Many times, too, when my mother was at the kitchen sink, my father would come to stand behind her, wrap his arms around her waist, rest his chin on her shoulder, and the 2 of them would sway in place to a tune only they heard. I have pieced together enough to know that what happened on the day of the incident was not done because my father was a bad man, a bad father. It was done because, well, we'll get to that. This isn't some magic trick where the secret machinations are kept hidden. No, this is all about the reveal, the truth, and we will get to it. We will. But first, let me set the scene that may lead you to believe that my father was a bad or troubled man, even while I assure you that he was not. My father was a good man, and he loved me. Of this, I am almost certain. And the next chapter is called Fireworks. My stomach felt rotted out from the cotton candy I'd hogged down at the autumn carnival the previous evening. And before I knew it, I was puking liquefied sugar on my 3rd grade classroom's carpet, my guts feeling as scraped out as a Halloween pumpkin. The nurse called my house, but my mother wasn't there as she ought to have been. So the nurse sent me packing the 5 blocks home. That's what they did back then, sent you packing. When I arrived home, my father's pickup truck sat idling in the driveway. What do you want me to tell you? That as soon as I saw his truck, I sensed a corrosive dread, an implacable horror. I wish I could tell you that is how it was, that I stopped dead with fear, but I can't. There's a blank there. You'd think instead there would be a blank for what came next. But no, I seem to have been born without the DNA for self-preservation. What I can tell you is that his truck idled in the driveway, its driver's door left open, as John Denver's back home again floated from inside the house, out the open front door and across the yard. And the front door being open should have perhaps triggered foreboding in me as well. Then I was inside the living room. I don't remember entering the house. Suddenly I was just there. John Denver's singing died, and the record player's needle crackled and spat endlessly in its final groove. "Dad," I said, or at least I think I said. I crept down the hall, the skipping record needle a threadbare heartbeat, heard through a weak ham radio signal from half a galaxy away. Kush, kush, kush. The door to my parents' bedroom stood open. Through it, I eyed him from behind, slouched on the edge of my parents' bed, his back to me. "Dad," I said. Something was wrong, terribly, irrevocably. I could sense it, smell it, hear it in the sinister silence. Terror sheared through me. My stomach lurched. I felt like I would vomit again, yet nothing remained inside me. My guts heaved anyway, a violent convulsion I thought might rend loose my aorta. The bedroom walls throbbed, and I listed, greasy with sickness, as if I'd stepped from a carnival ride. My body had not yet acclimated to gravity as the world spun on its cockeyed axis. "Dad," I whispered, my mouth dry as bone dust. I edged toward his side of the bed. I saw his feet dangling above the floor like the feet of a little boy. I knew he was suffering. This fact was as plain as the shotgun propped against his knees and pointing under his chin. Dad, I said, and reached out for him. The shotgun went off. I shut my eyes and stood disembodied in a soundless, senseless vacuum. Hot blood speckled my lips. I tasted copper as I stood there with my eyes closed for an eternity, and then stood there for an eternity more. Part of me, that boy, still stands there and will stand there forever, unmoving, unfeeling, unalive. We speak of zombies as the undead, but I discovered in that moment that the true zombies are unalive. My ears rang from the blast, a high eardrum piercing whine, like that of a wet finger traced along the rim of a crystal glass. I peeled my eyelids open, their lashes gummed with blood. I could not look at him. Instead, I looked out the window at our street, where the autumn sun shone golden, and the trees swayed softly in the breeze, oblivious to my ruin. I wanted to swallow the world whole. Anger boiled in me, and grief swelled like a tsunami out in the middle of the mindless Pacific, invisible to the innocents on shore, yet out there nonetheless, gathering intensity, blind and unfeeling and utterly unstoppable. I lifted my eyes to the ceiling to see the scarlet fireworks that would have been spectacular had it not been made of his gore. I looked at the floor and saw it, the small square slip of paper, as white as sun-bleached bone, that would be the instrument of my eventual desolation. Oh, I said, or I think I said. I don't know, to be honest, but that's what I hear in my head all these years later as I write this. After all, I was only 8. What do you recall with any certainty from when you were 8? Anything? Anything at all? I might have been howling my throat ragged for all I know. Whatever horrors visited me that day, whatever disease was past that infects my blood, no matter the words I write to make sense of it, there's one thing that will trouble me forever about that day. The note. I picked it up and read those 8 words, the first evidence that made me believe that not all was as it seemed. I folded a note, slipped it into my pocket. Later, I would secret away in a box in the rear of my closet and not look at it again for nearly 8 years. Even now, I don't know why I kept it or hid it. I did not understand what it meant. Those 8 words were as inscrutable as Sanskrit to me. But later, after my father had been taken away in a silent ambulance, my mother asked if there was a note, imploring me to tell the truth, as if she knew there was a note. I gazed at her unblinking, and I lied. No, no note. Some instinct told me this was the right thing to say, the safe thing. Though I'd wished later that I'd said, yes, here it is, take it. Please, just take the rottenest, poisonous thing and thrust it into her hand and let her deal with it and been rid of it forever. None of what followed would have ever happened if I'd given her the note and she'd read those 8 words for herself, but I didn't. And so here we are.
Wow. That makes me want to reread the entire book again.
Thanks.
I mean, that's great storytelling, because I was reading along as you did it, and then I stopped reading along and just let your words take me. But I could see him shining his Tom McCann's. I could hear the Bob Denver, and this line, a part of me, that boy, still stands there and will stand there forever. Yeah, that was pretty much my reaction to it. So. Yeah,
thanks. And it's funny, as writers, there's so many little things to keep track of. You know,
oh, yeah.
When I'm reading, I'm thinking, oh, I had to do research to see there was John Denver's song out at that time, because if I screw that up, the whole thing's ruined. You know, if that, you know, I had to say there's so many little things that readers are unaware of that is a challenge to do, and part of all the conjuring we have to do is, I got to make sure that, because if it's not, someone will email me and say, you know, John Denver's song didn't come out for it.
Well, now they won't even email you. Now they'll just post it.
Yeah, now they'll just
big capital letters.
Yeah,
Don't you know? No, I'm with you. I mean, I was the same thing with Boogeyman. It's like, and it wasn't enough that I knew that a certain movie was released that year. I had to make sure it was released, you know, by October, because if it was a November movie, someone's going to come and get me. And yeah, I mean, that's probably the highest compliment I feel like as a writer I can give another writer is just when that kind of storytelling that puts you right there and kind of takes away the present world and location that you're sitting or standing in and transports you. And that's what I always say, the best writers kind of have a key to the time machine. And that's what this book is for me.
Thanks. Yeah, I try to do that, I work hard at it. And so I'm glad it worked.
My dog, who is in the room with me, is about to vacate the room. I heard some crying, so good. Now we have peace. So I wanted to ask the old chestnut of a question, which we all get, but in this case, I'm really interested as far as where did it come from? Where did the inspiration for, was it a small idea at first that grew, or did you see it kind of semi fully formed?
Yeah. So I usually start with a strong image or two that feels that there's enough here for at least a short story, but I think, I can distinguish between a short story and a novel idea now too. So there was an incident that happened with a friend of mine growing up that was very traumatic and somewhat similar to this. And he ended up going down a dark path that led to a lot of criminality and tragedy. And that always stuck with me because no one knew this trauma had happened to him, that without that happening, there's no life of crime. There's no desperation. There's none of this loneliness, but we didn't know. And he was an affable, funny, charming, athletic, very nice guy that we knew. And then 2 years after he moves, he ends up dead, shot by the police. And so I always knew I wanted to write something fictionalized about what happens to a boy or a girl, that's traumatized and gets no help. They're just left there to sort of figure it out. And there's no figuring it out. You're in so far over your head. But then also when I grew up, there was an estate very similar to the one in the novel, not as gothic or anything, but that's what we do as writers. We have to elevate it. But one night a barn burned down across the road from us on the edge of the estate. And it was a dark summer night, and my sisters and I, we were close enough we could see the light. What is going on? We got in we were already in our pajamas and walked up, half a mile, and huge hay barn. I mean, 3 stories high and just massive. It was just totally engulfed, just orange flames, 100 feet high in the black summer sky. And I always wanted to write that. And then somewhere along the line, I started writing about these 2 kids on a roof, which is part of the scene when he's 16.
Right.
And I knew somehow these 2 kids were going to be involved. One of them was going to be the younger kid that has this traumatic event. And whatever happened earlier was going to lead to this, not a barn, but a mansion burning with people inside it.
So you had the imagery of the fire.
I had the imagery of the beginning and the end,
Right.
A traumatic event happening, and then a mansion burning down with, several people in it. I didn't even know who they were. And then when I write, and I think sometimes it comes through in a good way with the mysteries and the suspense that I write, is that I don't outline at all. I usually have very loose idea, and I'm really very present with the character.
So you're going where that story takes you, big time.
Yeah, I go really where it takes me. I didn't know even how his father was going to die until he opened the door and he's there with the shotgun. And then I didn't know that there was a note until he looks down and he sees the note. And I didn't know what was going to be on the note until Waylon turns it over and it said, "I am not who you think I am." And I was like, oh boy, I'm in for it now.
Yeah.
I really got to figure.
So as a writer, you're like a recipient of a lot of happy accidents that just fall into place like that, from your subconscious and from whatever is up there helping us.
Yeah, whatever's there, and I just have to be present to get it down. And it really feels like sometimes, there's a house, a cabin he goes to in the swamp, and he's going to seek someone out he thinks might be able to give him help, and he's not even sure that's where the person lives anymore, or lives. And I didn't either until, I didn't know if it was going to be the person he was looking for, or it was going to be someone different to tell him, you're on the wrong track. And or when he goes to see a doctor about certain things to try and help him.
I love,
You know,
see, I
there's a
love
lot
that.
of, so, and I
love
think
that.
some
That's
of
your
it comes
process.
through, you know, yeah.
And I, you know, I mean, it makes total sense, but I've never really heard anyone simply put it into those words of that. You know, it is that kind of process really does serve a mystery or suspense or thriller writer, because you are so present, and because you're just as surprised as the reader is eventually, you know, just ahead of time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll be shocked where the reader is shocked. I'll be like, oh man, you know,
Right.
when it finally clicks. And a lot of times you probably experience this. It doesn't, those sort of things don't always happen when you're actually sitting there writing. I might be mowing the
Oh,
lawn
yeah.
or up on a ladder trying to
Mhm.
paint an eave to not get stung by bees, or walking my dog, and click, 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 you
Yeah.
know,
Sheer happiness.
yeah.
And then you're like, I am a magician, because
Yeah.
yeah, I love it, because I always say I wanna pretend like I had those pieces fitting from the very beginning, and I'm just a really
Yeah.
smart individual. But I always feel like I can't even lie about that, or kid about it,
Yeah.
because he'll come back and bite me in the ass. So I have to
Yeah.
just say, look,
Yeah.
I'm going with you, and I love
Yeah.
those happy accidents. So yeah,
Yeah.
that makes my night hearing that.
Yeah, and I'm just here to tell the story, you know, and as well as I can, and that yeah, you know, I'm a lot smarter I'm a lot smarter on paper than I am in person.
Now, do the
You know,
ideas ever come so
I
quickly
can
that
edit all the bad stuff out. What's that?
do your ideas ever come when you're into the heart of a story? Do the ideas ever come so rapidly that you do scribble some down, so it's not really an outline, but it's kind of connect the dots? Or do you just trust
Yeah.
yourself to remember?
Yeah, I write it down, you know, and I write a lot. When those thoughts come, you know, I try to, you know, get them written down as quickly as possible. If I am like mowing the lawn or something, I'll try to, you know, come back and try to get them down. I write a lot of my first drafts actually longhand in notebooks with a pencil, so I can write them anywhere I want, and then I start to transpose them into a Word doc after. So by the time I get them into a Word document, it's almost a third draft, because I'll have the notebook, and then I have to try to read my handwriting, which is degrading by the minute. It's like reading 300 pages of some doctor's prescription now. But by the time I, you know, type in when I'm editing it through my head onto the Word doc page, you know, so it's almost like a third draft by the time I get it. But I'll write notes all the time, and if I have an idea when I'm writing a first draft, I'll write, you know, something up in the corner, you know, remember this, or if I don't know what verb to write, I'll just put X's, you know, come back
Yeah, I
to it
do.
later.
Yeah.
You know, you know, I'll leave that for future Eric to
Right.
figure out, you know.
Well, that makes me smile. Yeah, I like that, because that's the only time I write stuff down, is when the ideas are coming too fast. And
Yeah.
then I always feel like, well, it's not really an outline, it's a connected dots type of thing. And then even then, you know, surprises come left and right. And no, I love that. So,
Yeah.
so Waylon was essentially in your heart, kind of your friend from your youth, or your earlier days.
Yeah, well, the traumatic thing that happened was, and then Waylon a lot, there's some of me in there, and then some of him. Just with this, it was sort of finding his voice, and his voice also from someone who's older, you know, his older self writing this, but really trying to tap into that. So there was some of that friend, and then some of me, or a compilation of other friends I grew up with, you know, that's, you know, compilation of several boys put together. But he really came alive, you know, early on, forming and became his own, you know, his own thing, where there's what I know growing up as a boy, and what I know of my friends' experiences. And then he just sort of took on his own, you know, his own character and his own voice. Finding his voice was the key. And once I found that, he just sort of took over in his own right.
And do people from your real life, your wife, friends, relatives, do they ever recognize pieces of yourself in the characters that you write? Do they ever kind of hit you and say, I know that was you?
Yeah, they'll do that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how about Clay and Juliet? The other two characters in the book. Clay is Waylon's best friend. They have what I felt like is a really realistic, friendship from the 80s, where it's kind of it's a physical, verbal jousting type of a friendship. And it's just interesting because my sons, their friends are very much that way.
Yeah.
I grew up with friends like that, but then you do run into people who are like, I've never had that kind of relationship before, where it's like, I can pick on you. I can punch you in the shoulder. I can put you in a headlock. I can say these things to you, but I'm not gonna let anyone else do it.
Right.
And it struck me as very authentic.
Yeah. And it can get complicated too,
Oh yeah.
when someone doesn't want to be punched in the shoulder anymore, like sometimes he's had enough. And the other friend, he's much more athletic and physical and has an easier way with dating and with girls. And so there becomes that tension and that friction and that happens between teenagers. But his friend Clay, even though he appears to have like sort of the upper hand in a lot of ways, you recognize really quickly in their first scene together that he has trouble, with his father, and that, he's a lot of what he's doing is bravado, that typical, they don't really know they're doing all these ritualistic behaviors in a way,
Right,
but
right.
not. And I wanted some moments where that sort of got cleared away and they could really interact or really speak their own truths to each other, even if one of them wasn't prepared to hear it. There's a scene with him on the railroad tracks where he's like, enough, and he's, his friend still doesn't quite get it. And then, his friend Clay later on, sort of comes clean in a note, but whether it's too late or not for their friendship at that point is another thing.
I think readers will find them very realistic, and I just it put a highlight up for me because, and you kind of just spoke about it, is when you're growing up, even your best friend, there's still so much that is unsaid up to a certain point, and then with that moment where you kind of lay it on the table, both sides have to be ready.
Yeah, right.
Because if the person who's doing the listening isn't ready, it doesn't work.
Right. Right.
And it's exactly that scene at the railroad track. So yeah.
Yeah.
And how about Juliet?
Yeah, I wanted there to be sort of a platonic relationship where he's sort of smitten, Waylon's sort of smitten with this girl and very shy around her because he is. And then, his friend Clay is, he's athletic and he's on the varsity hockey team and very easy with interacting with girls. So there's that sort of, tension and triangle with the three of them. And he's at the more deeper into the mystery that Waylon gets, the more distrustful he gets of everyone on all sorts of levels,
right.
And really intensifies. And but I wanted something that was sort of innocent, though, sort of, he's a much different kid than Clay. Waylon's, he's really into his books and he's thoughtful, but he's also he's very lonely and very guarded about, when she gets involved in the investigation with him, she wants to come over to his house to look at the note, and he doesn't want to bring her there because he's living on the brink of poverty. And he knows that she's not wealthy necessarily, but she's, middle class, maybe upper middle, but still worlds away from
right. Yeah.
inside his house. And the trauma that he's dealt with still lingers, so there's that tension where if only as the adult reader or a reader with some perspective, you sort of want to be like, it's okay. She actually likes you.
That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to grab by the shoulders and say,
as a friend, maybe, but maybe more, but just, you're okay. She's, and she's not going to care what your house looks like. She's not going to care. She just wants to hang out with you and figure this out with you,
No,
that causes tension for the reader in a different way than being, you're right with him and are in his skin. But at the same time, as a reader, you have a different perspective, and you can be like, I like books where I want to reach in and
Throttle the guy.
try to resolve, don't, that type of thing. It creates tension in a different way for a reader too,
Well, even the logistic,
you know,
because the book is set in the 80s, like you said, there's no cell phones, there's no texting.
Right.
Even the logistics of how they kind of don't connect a few times. She doesn't show up maybe, or the so-and-so's late, and even that, as the reader, built that frustration in me, because I was like, come on, give him a break. Let him discover that he really is okay in this situation, because I know he doesn't feel like he's okay anywhere. So I was like, yeah. So again, it was good stuff, and it kind of, for me, put a spotlight on how different it was back then, and just not having cell phones and not having everyone on computers, so you could IM each other, and even that nowadays, IMing is like archaic. So my kid would be like, hey, what's IMing? So
right. And with that, just her being late when they're, meet me at the library, and she's late and he has no way to contact her. Whereas today, writing a story now, just be like, where are you?
Right.
I can't come, my parents are pissed off,
or you're being ghosted,
and then the tension's gone, right? Then there's so it was fun to write back then too, because you don't have that access, and it builds much greater tension, because you as a reader don't know what's going. Is she late because he did act weird and that put her off? Is there something else going on, or is is
she with Clay?
Yeah. So
and because you buy that mistrust immediately. Number one, they're 16, they're teenagers,
right.
And then number two, it's like you said, it's natural. One's a bookworm and the other one's a jock, and it's just kind of the natural order of things, especially when you're a kid. So, well, I wanted to ask you one more thing before we I think we get to the questions soon, but so you're in Vermont.
Yes.
Right now. And so and I didn't know this, I read this recently, but so you live within what, 5 or 10 minutes of where the great Shirley Jackson?
Yeah. We live about 10 minutes from where Shirley Jackson lived. 10 minutes from Bennington, North Bennington. We drive by Shirley Jackson's house all the time. She, probably a lot of people who are viewing this know who she is, but she wrote The Lottery, and she wrote The Haunting of Hill House, and she wrote We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and a number of Gothic famous. The Lottery might be one of the most famous stories.
She essentially became immortal right down the street from you.
Yeah, and she, and so we go by her house. We go by the Powers Market, which has been there since 1850, I think. She would go there, and when she walked from her house there one day and was in the store and really not liking the vibe of the locals. And as she came up with The Lottery, by the time she strolled her toddler daughter back to the house, she had it down. She sat down, wrote it, sent her to her agent the next day. And Donna Tartt, who wrote The Secret History, she wrote that in Bennington College when she was there. And that's a very Gothic novel.
Oh, yeah.
And it's set, she mentions the Bat and Kill River, and she mentions the abandoned warehouses, and she mentions these pubs, and surrounded by all that. And then out my kitchen window is Glastonbury Mountain, where in the 49 to 54, 5 years, 4 years, 5 people disappeared and were never found again. One of them, very oddly, this woman was with her friend, leaving the trail from her cabin that her family had owned for ages. And they were on the trail. And she did something, got wet because she slipped in the creek. And they were only a quarter mile from her cabin. She's like, you wait here. I'm going to go back. I'm going to change, and I'll be back. And she was never seen again. Her friend went back to the cabin after an hour and said, where are, expecting her to be there. And they're like, she's not here. Wow. So Shirley Jackson based her second novel on the disappearance of that Bennington College girl. She disappeared in like 46, I think, when Shirley Jackson was writing and living in North Bennington. And she based her second novel on the disappearance of that girl. And I can see it out my kitchen window. And I think it's the mountain that Donna Tartt used as that at least inspired her for Cataract Mountain, where Bunny is killed in The Secret History.
Right.
And so I'm just surrounded by all this stuff, and I really wanted to write a Gothic novel. And just being in this atmosphere and driving by Jackson's house and the place where she, just and the woods and the mountain that inspired them, it's just sort of seeped into me a bit. And since I take my notebook, I could write anywhere. And we even go up to Glastonbury Mountain in the spring, my kids and I and my wife. And there's also a ghost town up there that
you live like you live in like a Walt Disney.
I know. And it was built, so there was this mansion and hotel and inn that were built up there. It used to be a logging town of like 200 people in 1880, and then they cleared all the trees, so there was no lumbering left that they could do to turn the wood into charcoal for the local iron ore foundries. And someone said, well, we'll use the railroad tracks that are here and build an inn and a hotel. And it was there for about 6 months. In that first spring, a flood came and wiped everything out, and the town got abandoned, and no one's ever lived there since. So there's all of that. And I just sort of tapped into that in writing this book. That's sort of Gothic Vermont feel.
That's awesome. So you're pretty much obligated every time you drive by to like point out the car window to your children and say, that's where Shirley Jackson lives. And they roll their eyes at you.
That's all, they don't know, yeah. Although when I was in the store with my daughter, Bennington Bookshop, and we were looking at novels, and I said, you should, this is a good one. This is by Shirley Jackson. She lived in, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would be the cheesy dad pointing that.
I'll read what I want to read. I told my 6-year-old son the other day, when I couldn't get him to eat green beans, I'm like, try it with some Parmesan cheese. When I was 6, I loved, I didn't like green beans. I had them with Parmesan cheese. I love it. He's like, but Dad, I'm not you when you were 6. So that doesn't really matter.
Already, huh?
I'm like, he wasn't being rude or anything.
No, right.
It's just that logic,
Matter of fact.
Yeah. You got me. Okay. You aren't me when I was 6.
That's great.
Anyway.
Do have either of them shown any flashes of Dad's kind of off kilter brain, or however I should the polite way to explain that?
Are they going to be okay? Are they going to be okay in life if they do anything other than be a writer?
Yeah. Or just
no, they do. They love stories. They love stories, and they love books, and they like to write and tell stories. And my daughter is 10, and she's really into the books with Flavia de Luce. The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie was the first one, that series, and she read, I think, 50 Nancy Drews.
Nice.
She's got plot down.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And she'll watch some other show or read some of the books. She's like, that's just Nancy Drew. They're just reading.
Already. That's great. Yeah, no,
I was like, yeah, it is. I was like, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah,
and they're at a fun age too.
Yeah.
Lots more years to torture Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
And make you guys smile.
Yeah.
I think she she'll
okay.
Back in here and maybe answer. There she is. Hey, Becca.
Hi guys. All
Hi.
right. So it looks like we have some questions. So the first one is from Haley Rickstad, and she's asking, what's your favorite part of the book?
Favorite part of the book? That's a good question. I would say my favorite parts of the book are when Waylon is with his dog Molly, because that's where you really understand how sweet this kid is and how loving he is, and how he really wants everything to be different. And he realizes that his life is just so informed by something so out of his control. And this dog is sort of his life vest, his life, the dog loves him back unconditionally, as dogs do. And there's no complications between, him and the dog. And those are tender moments. And then a scene with his sister, who he loves dearly too, and he wants to protect sort of as a father, but he's only, a year and 16 months older than her or whatever. And so he can't. And they're always sort of missing each other emotionally, and except for one or two scenes toward the last third, probably, where they are able to have this exchange that I thought was revealing and sort of, peeled back all the stuff that was getting in the way of them speaking truthfully to each other. And I liked that scene a lot.
So the next question is from Justin Leahy. And the question is, was the title of the book always the same, or did it change over the course of writing it? And if so, why did it change?
So it was always the same. As soon as Waylon turned over the note and read, "I am not who you think I am," I knew that was the title of the book. Because I knew that was the main mystery of the book. And it's a very mysterious, like in the jacket copy, one secret, 8 cryptic words, that would be the title. And that was one of the easiest titles I ever had. Rich, how are you with titles? Do they come pretty easily, or?
No, not really.
I know.
What's funny is when we were talking about your process and you said that the note was as much of a surprise for you as anyone. I'm like, and there's your title. Of course, it had to.
That one was easy.
Yeah. No, Chasing the Boogeyman was originally just brilliantly called The Boogeyman, and that was my editor's suggestion. He thought it sounded more true crimey, which he was 100% correct about. And with the next Gwindy book, Steve and I, we probably batted a dozen titles back and forth, and we had a few that were like really poetic and sounded great, and almost sounded like like a piece of a song lyric. And then we kept coming back to the simplest one that kind of really encompassed what the book was about. So yeah, no, that I'm not very good at all, which is why I have no cool title. I am not who you think I am.
Yeah, that was a lucky one for me. Yeah, the others are been much trickier.
All right, so another question is from Bremen Armstrong, and they're asking, how long was this book in the works?
So there were those, few ideas I had floating around for, some of them since I was a kid, but to actually write the book, it took about 2 years to write this one.
And then from the same person, they're asking, so they've read your other books, the ones with, I think, the character Wrath, is that right? And so they're wondering, do you feel any kind of sadness not writing about him and those familiar characters?
I do sometimes. Yeah, I miss them. I tell my wife that, and I'll write some of those. I have a couple ideas that I know will be good books for the Cane and Crime series for Wrath and for Sonia Test. I find that I can write them very easily. I just slip right into their world and I know them well. And I like to write where they are now, and it's, I do miss writing about them and wondering what's going on with them, but enough is built up that when I sit down to write them, they should spring to life, pretty quickly.
So the next one is controversial. Red Sox or Yankees from Allie.
Oh, Red Sox. Come on.
That's an easy one, even for me.
Yeah.
Even for a hard luck Orioles fan like me.
Yeah. I don't know what the score is now. I realized, oh wow, this is going to be right during the wild card game. I'm glad we have we can pause games. Rich is like, shit, I'm missing it. I didn't know it was on right now.
Take a look at my phone. I keep seeing the Don Winslow arc in the background. And I'm like, Don sent me one too, but it got lost in the mail. So Don, if you're watching this, I still haven't read City on Fire. So I'm kind of being pathetic and throwing the hint out in the middle of Eric's stay here.
I got yours right here too.
Awesome.
People should definitely, this was up there, very, best book of the year so far for me, probably as far as mysteries. I mean, it was, I loved it.
Thank you.
All right, so the next question is, what was the most difficult part in writing this book? What did you struggle with the most to capture your satisfaction?
Good question. There's a lot of joy in writing, but there are a lot of challenges, and my wife can attest, and she knows because we often write in the same room, that there's a lot of not writing. There's a lot of this, there's a lot of walking around. There's a lot of frustration. I'd say, just as you go toward the end, making sure everything works and that the reveals, and to me, I don't ever have twists ahead of time because I'm writing it the way I write, that I discover these things as I go. So that I don't have a twist where like, oh, I've got to write to reach this twist and make this twist work, because I write differently than that. So, but still, those last 30 pages, tying everything up in a way that's satisfying, but sometimes as a reader, when things are tied up too neatly, it feels forced, or it can feel contrived to me. So really, really massaging and working that ending so that it's just the ending I want, because I think the ending is the most important part of a novel. And whether I want someone to be really emotionally charged one way or the other when they put the book down. And they might love it or they might hate it. They might throw it across the room for one reason or the other, but I'd rather them throw it across the room than shut it and just walk away from it and be like, it's what I call the airplane test. If someone on a plane next to me is reading a book and they just shut it and then, finish it, how was the book? And they're like, it was okay. I'm not going to buy that book. But if they're like, I hated it. I hated the ending, you wouldn't believe this, that you went, they might say something that's like, that's the kind of ending I love.
Right.
So taste is subjective, but yeah, it was all right. That's a killer for me. So I want people, that doesn't mean I try and force a contrived ending, but I work hard on them to make them satisfying in their own way, so that the endings are always trickiest for me. Very long-winded answers.
So this question is actually pretty interesting. So do you find it difficult to write contemporary fiction given the abundance of technology that we have today compared to when this book takes place?
I do. In some ways I'm fortunate, or maybe I've designed it, that I write in remote Vermont mostly because, cell phones and technology can fail without it being forced. I'm down in my living room right now and not up in my office because the Wi-Fi stinks up there and we might break up. So, I find that tricky when I'm writing stuff that's contemporary and in a place where everything would be working, all the technology's working, because especially for mysteries or suspense, that there so much can just be addressed with a text message now. Help is there, that it's really hard to work around it, and also work around it in a way that's plausible, other than oh, now I'm randomly not getting service, or how do people interact? How quickly would they go to the internet to try to solve something or communicate with someone? So I find it tricky. I don't know if Rich does, but I find it kind of tricky.
Yeah, it's almost like it's the elephant in the room, whether you want it to be or not, and you always kind of have to, you have to address the, why isn't the location service or whatever it is on the telephone working? And for someone like me who's not very tech savvy as it is, I have to really rely on like my kids to kind of find those holes that I don't want anybody to poke into the story ahead of time, because I don't understand half of it myself. Like I said, what is it, location services? Is that's a thing, right?
Yeah.
As a writer, you have to address it before you have every other reader going, well, why doesn't he just check her location service on her phone? But I rarely write supernatural stuff. I've done it once, but that was the joy that I found at the end of that book. I'm like, man, you can throw every rule out the window.
Yeah.
Because you can explain it. It's supernatural, darn it. That's why it happened. So
yeah,
I'm going to do more of that stuff in the future.
Yeah, I should try my hand.
Yeah, you should. You'll feel like such freedom.
Yeah, I'll be liberated.
Yes.
So in the interest of time, maybe 2 more questions. Does that sound?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So from Bodhi, there's a question of, are any of the characters based on family members? they say that you mentioned drawing on childhood, your sisters?
No, not really. There's always parts, little pieces here and there. The mom is a single mom like my mom was, and but she's a much different person. So no, not a lot in this one. Others maybe more so, but not so much in this one.
And then the last question is, what is your favorite book from your childhood?
Ooh, that's a really good one. Depending on how far back you want to go, I mean, there's a great book called Algonquin. It was about this dog that I loved. It's along the lines of Where the Red Fern Grows, and I loved that. And then, but junior high, King's, Skeleton Crew and Night Shift, when I read those stories and some of Ray Bradbury's, they just transformed me. I was like, what are these stories? So that was a little later in, childhood, like junior high. And then, I loved Encyclopedia Brown and The Great Brain, and, books like that had that mystery element to it.
I posted that on Twitter once. Did any of you read Encyclopedia Brown? And the conversations that came from that were so wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I remember buying them at like the book clubs at school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we had a literary lunch in the library and in the principal's office once a week in 5th grade. We'd have literary lunch with the librarian, and it was me and like 7 6th grade girls in this literary lunch, reading books and discussing the Great Brain and Encyclopedia Brown at great length.
You figured that out early on, huh?
All right, so I think that's it.
Okay.
I just want to personally thank you both for being here, and we feel so honored to host this event. And I'm just going to drop another link in the chat just to remind everybody to purchase the book. And unless you guys have anything else you want to say.
No, I just want to say
buy Eric's book.
Thanks, and buy Rich's book, Chasing the Boogeyman. I just want to thank Rich for doing this. It's been a pleasure, because it's kind of we go back a long ways, where his Cemetery Dance magazine, which is a great horror magazine that came out in late 80s, early 90s. He was the first short story I ever submitted anywhere was rejected by Cemetery Dance, and he wrote this little note that said, keep at it. It's not right for us or whatever. And I did. And it was, through Twitter, which has a lot of downside to it as far as I'm concerned. One day, 10 years ago, I see Richard Chizmar says something about my book, The Silent Girls. And I was like, Richard Chizmar, what? So now here we are because of Twitter, so that's cool.
Yeah, that's a good
But
sign.
thanks for doing it. It's cool.
No, thanks for asking me. I had fun.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody.
You too.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks.